President Trump visiting Pittsburgh today in the wake of that mass shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue. He was greeted by thousands of protesters who didn't want him there playing consoler-in-chief. Also, Election Day now just 1 week away. We have got the latest numbers and analysis as America gets ready to head to the polls. Then we attempt to separate fact from fiction about that caravan, and there, trust me, is a whole lot more fiction than fact, especially if you're listening to one President Trump. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thank you for joining us this Tuesday. The President and the First Lady, they visited the Tree of Life Synagogue to pay their respects to the victims of the shooting where 11 people were gunned down. They were joined by Jared Kushner and his wife Ivanka, and also Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. That, as the funerals for those victims continue. The Trumps also laid stones at a memorial in front of the temple. It's a Jewish tradition to remember loved ones. But the president was also greeted by protesters in the thousands in Pittsburgh who had wanted him to stay away, many of them also calling for Trump to denounce white nationalism. The huge crowds turned out to be much bigger than anyone expected. Rabbi Myers from Tree of Life said he welcomed the president's visit and he greeted Trump there today, but this morning the rabbi also had some very strong words for politicians without naming names.
I turn to all of our elected leaders because hate doesn't know a political party. Hate is not blue, hate is not red, hate is not purple. Hate is in all. I turn to them to say, tone down the hate, speak words of love, speak words of decency and of respect. When that message comes loud and clear, Americans will hear that, and we can begin to change the tenor of our country.
Now, the presidential visit is also notable for who did not join the president but was asked. Pittsburgh mayor, he was not there, and he said Trump's visit would take away attention from those families grieving. All four of the congressional leaders were reportedly invited to attend who represent the Pittsburgh district, but all declined. Same deal for both senators from Pennsylvania. They skipped it. So did some members. Over the past week, we have seen the horrific shootings in Pittsburgh, pipe bombs sent by a Trump supporter to prominent Democrats and critics of the president, and a white man killing two African Americans in cold blood in what the FBI is calling a hate crime. It has been a week of hate that has shaken up the country. 11 people were killed in a Pittsburgh synagogue when a gunman opened fire.
Suspects talking about all these Jews need to die.
Last week, 14 pipe bombs were mailed to high-profile Democrats and CNN, most critics of the president, but also the subject of his attacks. Yesterday, a 15th pipe bomb was discovered, also addressed to CNN. Then in Kentucky, 2 African Americans were shot to death at a grocery store by a white man, that after he failed to barge into a black church. Some critics say President Trump's rhetoric is to blame for an increase in bias incidents.
Jews will not replace us!
I think there's blame on both sides.
White House Press Sec Sarah Sanders says Trump is not responsible.
No, the president's not placing blame. The president's not responsible for these acts.
But the Anti-Defamation League says that they have seen a rise in activity from far-right extremist groups during and since the 2016 presidential election, often driven by social media.
This isn't happening in a vacuum. In 2017, we saw a 57% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in the United States.
The alleged gunman in Pittsburgh had reportedly posted on the social media site Gab shortly before entering the synagogue. That site, which touts itself as censorship-free, now temporarily shut down. The ADL also warns that hate speech is ramping up as we head into the midterm elections.
Last year, the single largest surge that we've ever seen in anti-Semitic acts in the United States.
So let's bring in our panel right now. Charlie King, he is New York co-chairman at the Mercury Public Affairs Office. He's also was a senior campaign advisor in Andrew Cuomo's re-election campaign. He's also hosting a new podcast called Big Shot. Speaking of big shots, Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent, and Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. You know, when you looked at the optics, Charlie, for an impromptu protest of thousands of people, when you looked at the faces, these are not professional protesters. These are just people who had said no. Can you remember a time, I don't care the political persuasion, where a president assuming the role of consoler-in-chief was said, please stay away?
No. I mean, but let's first start and say the right thing for any president to do is to actually go and console and try to unite the country at a time like this.
Yep.
That's the right thing to do. Unfortunately, the president is so toxic in times like this and has divided the country with his rhetoric, going to your point, that you have not, grassroots or grass tops activists coming out, but you have everyday people coming out expressing their outrage at what is going on and how his words, his rhetoric, his strategy is literally tearing apart the very fabric of this country. And everyday citizens who normally actually don't get involved in politics can't stand it and feel compelled to come out and tell the president stay away, which is just, we haven't seen it in our lifetime.
And like Charlie said, a president should go and say, I feel your pain. But to me, Andrew, there was two competing reasons why people went out. A lot of people feel, in ways small or large, that those three stories, that 72 hours that we saw of the Kentucky shootings where people were targeted because they were black and killed only because of it, where we saw 11 people gunned down and killed only because of their faith, where we saw, we can keep going, all the bombs being delivered because they didn't agree with the political or they were critical of a certain president, that the president has ginned up this, I don't care if it's at a barbershop, it's at your dinner table, it's if you're just having a water cooler conversation. We are so riled up as a country right now at a time of economic prosperity. People put that at the feet of the president, and you don't have to look hard to see the signs. But then there's the other part. The very issue of him coming out to it. People from within the White House reported the president had to be forced to say anti-Semitism in his statement. The president did not want to take one step back by claiming he was a proud nationalist. And the day that he's coming out, he's putting forward the idea of, and we'll get into this more when we talk about this caravan, the idea of birthright citizenship, or if you're born to this country but your parents come from somewhere else, even though the Constitution says that's the law, he's going to try and use an eraser on it. So you have actions in the closing argument for an election and what led up to this awful weekend that we saw in this country with fingerprints or at least volume of the president where they say, no, don't say you feel bad for us, stop what you're doing.
Yeah, I was significantly put off by the president's appearance in Pittsburgh to the point of being borderline sickened by the whole thing. And it took me a while to figure out why, and here's why. The president visiting Pittsburgh today was the equivalent of the head of the NRA visiting a community suffering from a mass shooting. Not personally responsible for it, but certainly culpable, certainly contributed to it. And by not taking any responsibility for it, not offering an apology, not seeking to tamp down the voices of anger and hatred and vitriol that he has helped unleash, even if he's done it, unintentionally, still the responsible thing would be to tone those things down and prevent other tragedies like this. The president's incapable of doing that. He shows up and does the minimum necessary to check the box for the photo op that says, I did this. But there was no effort at reconciliation there. There was no effort at community there, at harmony there. There was nothing that we expect other than the president actually physically being in the space. And I found it an insult to the victims. I found it an insult to the process. And particularly when so many of the people in that community had said, this is what we need from you. We need you to tamp down these voices, or we need you to apologize, or we need you to, declare that this is wrong. And he wouldn't do any of that. So not only was he, inappropriately placed there, but he basically sullied the invitation, whatever level of invitation it was, by refusing to respect the wishes of the people he came to visit.
Dom, I was thinking, I was like, I can't put my finger, but there's a familiarity to the anger that's out there on the streets. And again, people got to look at the pictures of the protest because you had elderly people, kids, not just that they're not going to vote for this guy or maybe his platform, but the people like, no, there were people that had religious signs, there were people here that were saying stop. I thought of whenever we've had controversial shootings. Do you remember when de Blasio went to go to the hospital where those 2 cops were shot, and the cops turned their backs on him and all the rest. Now, of course, de Blasio never wanted any cop to be hurt on the job. But people were upset about rhetoric. Now, and people may say the cops were wrong. You don't turn your back on a mayor here. But take that to this degree. Of course the president never wanted those poor people in Pittsburgh to be harmed, let alone killed. In no ways. I don't even believe, for people who throw around that he's an anti-Semite, I don't believe that. He's populated his cabinet with Jews. He's got his son-in-law is Jewish, his daughter converted. But that said, the line that Andrew referenced from a Florida debate of all places, where the candidate turned to the other one and says, I don't think you're a racist, but the racists think you're a racist. People think when they do these things that somehow they're advancing what this president wants, and that's on him.
It is absolutely on this president, Richard. I agree with your point. You made the comparison of the de Blasio situation where the cops turned their back on him at the hospital. Well, times that times 5,000. That's what we're dealing with in Pittsburgh. The president has to understand that words matter. This is not a political game to get his approval numbers to go up. The president of the United States is dividing this country, and he's hurting us all. And that's what's playing out in Pittsburgh. And frankly, if he doesn't stop it, it may get a whole meaning, define stop, as just shut up. You know, stop it.
Well, we know he's not, Don, because he said from Pittsburgh he will do nothing between now and Tuesday but to hit the campaign trail with stop after stop. And to this point, Charlie, it seems that, you know, we all played sports, you know, shirts and skins. He's made a judgment call that he can't lose anybody on his team, even the most folks that he would never want to spend 5 minutes of his life socializing with. If they're on his team and he's got what he's got for an approval rating, he needs them all. So he's not going to push aside the worst elements thereof. Last night we played clips of presidents of both parties that at time of natural crisis, and even not, said things where they went after their own, including Ronald Reagan, by the way, when he was at the NAACP in the early 80s. He said, you know, to anyone, you're not American if you don't welcome people of all colors and the rest. And of course, we can disagree on policy and should in this country, but he made it clear that just because you may vote for me doesn't mean I want you. I haven't heard that yet from the president, which is incredible. I mean, he really hasn't denounced the fringe groups who think, wrongly I hope, that they speak for him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but first of all, I shudder to think of Dominic in skins and the shirts and skins analogy.
Yes, I know. I burned that image out as soon as I said it here, but yes.
But you go to a very important point. When Senator McCain passed away, Barack Obama said the one thing they used to talk about is that even when they disagreed on everything and they would get together, they felt like they were on the same team. They were Americans. And that's what actually keeps us all together. We may disagree on a lot of stuff, but when a maniac goes in to shoot up 11 of us, Jewish people, we come together as one country. We put politics at the side and we come together. That's what a president is supposed to do. That's what I expect a Republican president to do when I'm a Democrat. That's what Donald Trump should be doing now. You're exactly right. He doesn't look at it that way. He looks at it that he's got a group of Americans that are, and I will never be on his team. He will be a shirt, I will always be a skin. That's just the way it's going to be. He said it in his 60 Minutes interview. He said, you know, I had to go out and basically mock somebody who was going after Kavanaugh because we need to win. Whoever the we is, it wasn't me, it wasn't America winning, it was his team. That is frightening for this reason, because at some point, not me personally, but people on my team have to make a decision. Do we fight back the way that he fights back? Eric Holder has already begun to say, well, maybe we should start to fight the way he fights. If he starts punching, maybe we should start to punch that way. then you get into, as Dominic was saying, a very dangerous civil
war. We
war.
have two different teams, and we can't operate as we, even if you have a passing knowledge of American history, that can't work. All right, coming up next, we pivot to politics. As I said here, a week away, we've got these pivotal midterms. We're going to take a look at the trends here, the hot candidates, who's cooling off, and more.